They said she inherited a ghost, a splinter of land so worthless it was a joke whispered in the sterile hallways of the system. What she found there wasn't just a home, it was a reckoning. And if you've ever felt like your story was written for you by someone else, stick around. You might see a little of yourself in what happened next. And hey, if you do, hit that subscribe button. This is a place for stories like ours. The day I turned 18 was the day I officially became a ghost. For 2 years, I'd been a ward of the state, a file in a cabinet, a name on a list. Case File 734, Ilara Vance. Orphan. My 18th birthday wasn't a celebration. It was an eviction notice from the only life I knew. Mrs. Gable, the director of the group home, called me into her office. It smelled like stale coffee and lemon-scented disinfectant, the official perfume of institutional sympathy. She had that look on her face, the one that was supposed to be kind but just looked tired. A look that said, "I've done all I can. Now you're someone else's problem." She slid a manila envelope across her particle board desk. It was thin, disappointingly so. "This is it, Ilara. Your inheritance." The word hung in the air between us, absurd and out of place. Inheritance. It sounded like something from a movie, something for people with sprawling family trees, not a girl whose only roots were in the cracked pavement of state-run facilities. I thought she was making a bad joke. My parents were gone, a fiery car crash on a slick winter road when I was 16. Grandparents? I had a vague, foggy memory of a woman with hands that smelled of soil and lavender, but she'd vanished from my life long before the accident. A ghost from a ghost. Mrs. Gable tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the envelope. "It's from your maternal grandmother, Eleanor Vance. The state located her will." It's modest. The way she said modest was the same way you'd say terminal. It was a word meant to soften a blow, but all it did was sharpen the edges. I opened the clasp. Inside was a single, rust-pocked iron key and a folded, yellowed document. A deed. It granted me ownership of a 1-acre plot of land in a town I'd never heard of. Northwood, Vermont. 1 acre. And a barn. That was it. No house, no savings account. Just a piece of dirt and a collapsing structure hundreds of miles away in the coldest corner of the country. I looked up at Mrs. Gable, my face a perfect blank. I'd learned long ago that showing disappointment was a waste of energy. Disappointment was the air we breathed in this place. "A barn?" I said, my voice flat. "That's it?" She gave me a small, tight-lipped smile. "Sometimes a fresh start is the best inheritance, dear. A piece of land is something. It's yours." It didn't feel like mine. It felt like a burden. A final, cosmic joke played on a girl who had nothing. The other kids in the home, the ones who were still stuck, they heard about it. It became a running gag. "Heard Ilara's a landowner now. Yeah, she's the queen of a dirt patch." They didn't mean to be cruel, it was just how we survived. We found the absurdity in the tragedy because it was the only thing we could control. They mocked my tiny inheritance because it was easier than admitting they were terrified of their own 18th birthdays, of the day they'd be handed their own empty envelopes and shown the door. I clutched the key in my pocket. It was heavy and cold, a solid piece of a past I didn't understand and a future I couldn't imagine. A bus ticket, $100 in state-issued transition funds, and a key to a barn. That was my send-off into the world. As I walked out of the group home for the last time, I didn't look back. There was nothing to see. Just a building full of ghosts in training, waiting for their turn to be set free into nothing. The bus ride was a long, rumbling journey through the skeletal remains of late autumn. The further north we went, the more the world seemed to lose its color, fading from the tired greens and browns of the city to a stark palette of gray and white. Snow began to fall, not the gentle, picturesque flakes from holiday cards, but a hard, determined flurry that seemed to want to erase the world. I watched the landscape change, the strip malls and gas stations giving way to dense forests of pine and birch, their branches already heavy with white. The bus was mostly empty, just me and a few other quiet travelers, each of us wrapped in our own private bubble of thought. My bubble was filled with a cold, simmering resentment. Why would she do this? This grandmother, Eleanor. Why leave me a useless piece of land in the middle of nowhere? If she had cared at all, wouldn't she have left money? Or a letter? Something, anything, that explained why she'd been absent for my entire life, especially after my parents were gone. The deed felt like an insult. The key, a mystery I had no energy to solve. I had her name, and that was it. A ghost leaving me a ghost of a property. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass of the window, the vibration of the engine a dull hum that matched the one inside my own head. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Get to Northwood, find a real estate agent, sell the land for whatever I could get, a few $100, maybe $1,000 if I was lucky. Then I'd take that money and disappear into a city somewhere, get a cheap apartment, a job washing dishes, and just survive. That's all I'd ever been taught to do. Survive. I pulled the deed from my backpack. The paper was thick, almost like cloth, and the ink was faded. I read the legal description, a jumble of coordinates and boundaries that meant nothing to me. Tucked into the fold, something I'd missed before, a smaller, newer piece of paper. It was a letter, but not from my grandmother. It was from a law firm, Blackwood & Sons, Real Estate Development. The letter was slick, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was addressed to the estate of Eleanor Vance. It said they were aware of the property transfer and were prepared to make a generous offer to acquire the land as part of a larger development project. They offered $5,000. $5,000. To me, it was a fortune. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was the answer to a problem I didn't even know how to start solving. It was enough to rent an apartment for a year, to buy food, to breathe. The letter was dated a week ago. They must have been tracking the probate process. They were efficient, predatory. My first instinct was a tidal wave of relief. This was it, my exit strategy. I wouldn't even have to stay in Northwood for more than a day. I'd find their office, sign the papers, and be on the next bus out. But then, a second thought crept in, a small, stubborn splinter of doubt. Why were they so eager? Why would a development company want one tiny, isolated acre with nothing on it but a derelict barn? $5,000 wasn't a generous offer for valuable land. It was a lowball offer for something they desperately wanted for some other reason. It felt too easy. Life had taught me that nothing was ever that easy. The bus slowed, groaning as it pulled into a small, snow-dusted depot. A single sign read, "Welcome to Northwood, population 487. The doors hissed open, and a blast of Arctic air hit me. It was a cold so profound it felt like it had teeth. I stepped off the bus, my thin jacket useless against the wind. The town was quiet, huddled under a thick blanket of fresh snow. The sky was a solid, unforgiving white. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the swirling snow, leaving me utterly and completely alone. For a long moment, I just stood there, the developer's letter in my hand, the iron key cold in my pocket. I had a choice: take the easy money and run, or step into the mystery of this place, this inheritance. For the first time in a long time, the choice was actually mine. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. I pulled my collar up, the wind biting at my cheeks, and started walking toward the town's single blinking traffic light, my boots crunching in the pristine snow. The town of Northwood wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. There was a main street with a handful of two-story buildings, their faces weathered by decades of harsh winters. A general store, a post office, a diner with a flickering neon sign that read "Eat," and a small office with a shingle that said Thompson Law. The rest were houses, modest and sturdy, with smoke curling from their chimneys like contented sighs. Everything was hushed, muffled by the snow. It felt like a town holding its breath. My first stop was the general store. A bell chimed as I pushed open the heavy wooden door, releasing a wave of warm air that smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and sawdust. An old man with a thick white beard and suspenders looked up from behind the counter where he was reading a newspaper. He watched me over the top of his glasses, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Not from around here," he stated. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, my voice feeling small in the quiet space. "I'm looking for a property. Vance. Eleanor Vance's place." The man's posture changed. He straightened up, his eyes softening with something that looked like recognition, or maybe pity. He took off his glasses and polished them with a cloth. "Eleanor's girl," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Heard you might be coming. I'm Bill. Owned this store for 40 years. Knew your grandmother well." He paused, his gaze searching my face. "You've got her eyes." I didn't know what to say to that. It felt like being handed a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was missing. She never mentioned me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Bill shook his head slowly. "Not in so many words. But she was always waiting for something. Or someone. She was a private woman. Strong. Kept to herself, mostly. Especially near the end." He gestured toward the back of the store. "Her place is about 3 miles out of town. North on Ridge Road. Can't miss it. It's the last place before the road dead ends at the old quarry." He looked me up and down, taking in my thin jacket and worn-out sneakers. "That's a cold walk, and the snow's getting deeper. You got a ride?" I shook my head. My $100 had to last. A taxi was a luxury I couldn't afford. Bill sighed, a gust of paternal frustration. "Carl is out with the plow, but he won't get to Ridge Road till morning. Look, you wait here. I'll close up in an hour. I'll run you out there myself." I tried to refuse, but he waved it away. "Nonsense. Eleanor would have my hide if I left her kin to freeze. Get yourself a hot coffee from the pot over there, on the house." I did as I was told, my hands shaking slightly as I poured the dark, steaming liquid into a styrofoam cup. The warmth seeped into my fingers, a small comfort in a world that felt vast and cold. While I waited, a man in a sleek black SUV pulled up outside. He wore a tailored overcoat and expensive shoes, completely out of place in this rustic town. He came into the store, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. There was an unnerving smoothness to his movements. "You must be Miss Vance," he said, his voice like polished stone. "I'm Mark Corrigan, from Blackwood and Sons." He extended a hand. I didn't take it. "He was the developer. We sent you a letter. I was hoping we could discuss our offer." Bill stepped out from behind the counter, placing himself subtly between us. "The girl just got into town, Mark. Give her a minute to breathe." Corrigan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Just wanted to welcome her to Northwood, and to remind her that our offer is a simple, clean solution. That property, it's a liability. We can take it off your hands. Cash in your pocket by tomorrow." He handed me a business card. "Think about it. It's the smart play." He gave a curt nod to Bill and left, the bell chiming his exit. The silence he left behind was heavy. "Blackwood's been trying to get that land for years," Bill said, his voice low and tight. "Eleanor never would sell. Not for any price." He looked at me, his expression serious. "Be careful, kid. That man's smile is as fake as a $3 bill. There's a reason they want that land so bad, and it ain't for the view." An hour later, Bill locked up the store and led me to his old, rattling pickup truck. The heater blasted warm, dusty air as we drove out of town, the truck's headlights cutting a path through the falling snow. The world outside the windows was a swirl of white and black. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the crunch of the tires on the snow. "She was a good woman, your grandmother," Bill said finally, his eyes on the road. "Tough as old leather, but good. The town thought she was eccentric, a hermit. But she saw things other people didn't." We turned onto a narrower, unplowed road. The truck slowed, fighting for traction. And then I saw it. Set back from the road, almost swallowed by the snow-laden pines, was the barn. It was larger than I'd imagined, its gray wood weathered and scarred. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old spine, and one of the big doors hung crooked on its hinges. It wasn't a building. It was a monument to decay. It looked haunted. Bill pulled the truck to a stop. "This is it," he said softly. "Home sweet home, I guess." He looked over at me. "You sure you'll be all right out here? I can take you back to town. You can get a room at the inn." I looked at the barn. It was dark, desolate, and forbidding. But it was mine. It was the only thing in the entire world that was mine. "I'll be okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Thank you, Bill, for everything." He nodded, not looking convinced. "My number's on the store's door. You get into any trouble, you call. Day or night, you hear me?" I promised I would. I got out of the truck, my feet sinking into the deep snow. Bill waited until I'd reached the path to the barn door before he put the truck in reverse and slowly backed away, his headlights sweeping across the front of the structure before disappearing down the road. The silence that descended was absolute. It was just me, the falling snow, and the hulking, silent barn. I took a deep breath, the icy air burning my lungs, and pulled the old iron key from my pocket. It felt ancient in my gloved hand. I walked to the smaller side door, the one that wasn't hanging off its hinges. The lock was stiff with rust and cold. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought the key wouldn't turn. Then, with a loud, grating screech, the mechanism gave way. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into a cavern of absolute darkness. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, carrying the scent of old hay, dust, and something else. Something like memory. I stood on the threshold, hesitating. This was the moment of truth. Was this a tomb or a beginning? I fumbled for the small flashlight on my keychain, its beam weak against the oppressive dark, and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a solid, final thud. The beam of my tiny flashlight was a pathetic spear of light against the immense, vaulted darkness of the barn's interior. It was huge, far bigger than it looked from the outside. The ceiling soared up into a web of rafters, lost in the shadows. Dust motes danced in the weak light like tiny, frantic spirits. To my left were old animal stalls, their wooden gates weathered and gray. To my right, a jumble of shapes lay draped in dusty canvases, old farm equipment, stacks of lumber, things I couldn't identify. The ground was packed earth, cold and hard beneath my feet. Straight ahead, at the far end of the barn, was a walled-off section, a small room built into the larger structure. A workbench sat just outside it, covered in tools and jars filled with screws and nails, all coated in a thick layer of dust. The silence was unnerving. It wasn't just quiet, it was a heavy, weighted silence, full of unspoken history. I felt like an intruder in a place that had been sleeping for a very long time. I started my exploration methodically, moving the flashlight beam over every surface. I was looking for anything that could tell me about the woman who had lived and died here. Anything that could explain the mystery of this place. The stalls were empty, save for some dry, brittle straw. The old equipment was rusted solid. I pulled back one of the canvases, coughing as a cloud of dust billowed into the air. Underneath was an old tractor, its red paint faded to a dull pink, its tires flat and cracked. It looked like a fossil. There was nothing of value here. Nothing to explain why a developer would offer $5,000 for it. My heart sank. Corgan was right. This place was a liability. I should have just taken the money. What was I even doing here, in the dark, in the cold, chasing a ghost? My anger at my grandmother flared again. It was a cruel trick, leaving me this empty shell. I made my way to the workbench. The tools were old but well cared for, arranged with a neatness that seemed at odds with the rest of the barn's chaos. Wrenches and hammers hung on a pegboard, their outlines traced in white paint. Jars of hardware were meticulously labeled in a spidery, elegant script. This was her space, I could feel it. I ran my hand over the scarred wooden surface of the bench, my fingers tracing the grooves and nicks of a lifetime of work. My flashlight beam caught something metallic. Tucked behind a row of jars was a small tin box, the kind that used to hold tea or biscuits. It was painted with a faded image of bluebirds. It wasn't locked. My fingers were numb with cold as I pried open the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a single photograph and a small, folded piece of paper. The photograph was black and white, its edges curled with age. It showed a young woman with dark, wavy hair and a smile that was both shy and defiant. She was holding a baby. The woman had my eyes. Bill was right. It was my grandmother, Eleanor. And the baby was my mother. I stared at the image, a strange ache blooming in my chest. It was the first picture I had ever seen of my mother as a baby. The first proof that she had once been small and new, held in the arms of a woman who loved her. I picked up the folded paper. It was a note, written in the same elegant script as the labels on the jars. It said, "For my little bird, should you ever need to find your way home. The heart of the house is not in the house. It's where the work is done. Trust the grain." I read it again and again. The heart of the house is not in the house. Trust the grain. It was a riddle, a clue. My grandmother hadn't left me with nothing. She had left me a puzzle. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered to life inside me. This wasn't just a random collection of junk. This was a message. I swept the flashlight beam over the workbench again, this time with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer just looking. I was searching. Where the work is done. This workbench. This was the place. Trust the grain. I looked at the thick, heavy wood of the bench top. It was made of several wide planks of oak, joined together. The grain was beautiful, a flowing pattern of dark and light lines. I ran my fingers over it, feeling for anything unusual. A loose board, a hidden seam? Nothing. I moved my light to the front of the bench. There were several drawers. I pulled them open, one by one. They were filled with more tools, coils of wire, spare parts, all ordinary. I was about to give up when my light caught a subtle irregularity on the side of the bench, near the floor. One of the thick legs that supported the bench was made of several pieces of wood laminated together. But on one side, the grain didn't quite match. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible difference, but now that I was looking for it, it was unmistakable. I knelt on the cold ground, my heart starting to pound. I pushed on the section of wood. It didn't move. I ran my fingers along the seam, feeling for a latch, a button, anything. Nothing. Trust the grain. I looked closer. The grain flowed downwards, but in one tiny spot, a knot in the wood created a small swirl. It was no bigger than my thumb. Acting on instinct, I pressed my thumb into the center of that knot. I felt a faint click. And then, a section of the wooden leg, the part with the mismatched grain, popped open an inch. It wasn't a drawer. It was a hidden compartment. It was deep, a dark cavity carved into the solid wood of the bench leg. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against a smooth, cold surface. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, leather-bound journal. My grandmother's journal. This was it. This was the heart. This was the story I had been waiting for my entire life. I sat on the frozen ground, the weak beam of my flashlight illuminating the worn leather cover, and opened the first page. The elegant, spidery script filled the page, and as I started to read, the cold, the dark, and the crushing weight of my own loneliness began to recede, replaced by the voice of a woman I had never known, but who was about to change everything. My hands were trembling as I held the journal. The first entry was dated over 30 years ago. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were clear, filled with a love so fierce it felt like a physical warmth against the barn's deep chill. "My little bird, my Sarah," it began. My mother's name. "You arrived today, a screaming, beautiful miracle. Holding you, I feel like I finally understand what the sun is for. You are everything." I read on, page after page. I read about my mother's first steps, her first words, the funny way she mispronounced spaghetti. I saw my mother not as the tragic figure from a car accident, but as a vibrant, laughing child, cherished and adored by her own mother. My grandmother's love for her daughter poured from every sentence. But then, as the years passed in the journal, the tone began to shift. A new name appeared. A man named Rick. My father. At first, Eleanor's entries about him were hopeful. "He makes Sarah laugh. He has a charm about him, a fire. I hope it's the kind that warms, not the kind that burns." Soon, her hope curdled into fear. The entries became shorter, more guarded. "He lost his job again. Blames everyone but himself. I saw a darkness in his eyes today when Sarah disagreed with him." It frightened me. Found a bruise on Sarah's arm. She said she walked into a door. I don't believe her. She's getting thin. The light is going out of her eyes. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew my father had a temper. I had vague, shadowed memories of shouting, of my mother crying. But I never knew the extent of it. My grandmother saw it all. She wrote about her desperate attempts to get my mother to leave him, to come home. But my mother was trapped, caught between love and fear, making excuses for him, believing his promises to change. Then came the entry about me. "Sarah is pregnant," she told me today, her eyes shining with a desperate, terrified hope. "She thinks a baby will fix him. I know it will only give him another weapon, another soul to break. I have to do something. I can't let him destroy this child too." I had to stop reading. A wave of nausea and grief washed over me. I sat in the dark, the flashlight beam trembling, the cold of the packed earth seeping into my bones. This wasn't the story I had told myself. I had always imagined my grandmother as someone who had abandoned us, who didn't care. The truth was, she had been fighting for us. She had been watching from the sidelines, her heart breaking. The journal continued, detailing a plan. Eleanor started saving money, selling off bits of the farm, preparing a way out for my mother and me. But Rick became more controlling, more paranoid. He cut my mother off from her family, moved them from town to town. My grandmother's letters went unanswered, her calls unreturned. And then, a new, more sinister element entered the story. Rick got involved with a man named Arthur Blackwood, the founder of Blackwood and Sons. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence. They weren't just developers. According to the journal, Blackwood ran a loan sharking operation on the side, preying on desperate people. Rick owed him a lot of money, and Blackwood was using that debt to force Rick into doing his dirty work, intimidating people, running illicit errands. The barn, this land, was in my grandmother's name, and it was the one thing Rick couldn't touch. Blackwood wanted it. He saw it as a way to settle Rick's debt. He pressured Rick to get Eleanor to sell. "That man, Blackwood, came to see me today," one entry read. "He smiled with his teeth, but his eyes were like a shark's. He offered me a pittance for my land, talking about development, about progress. I saw the truth behind his words. He's a poison, spreading through this town. He wants my home, my sanctuary. He wants to own everything. I told him to get off my property. He laughed. He said he always gets what he wants." The final entries were frantic, written in a shaky hand. My parents had died. Eleanor wrote of her crippling grief, a pain so profound I could feel it radiating from the page. But her grief was mingled with a terrible, burning guilt. "I should have done more. I should have forced her to leave him. I should have stolen you, my sweet Ilara, and run. But now it's too late for Sarah. But it's not too late for you." After the accident, she had tried to get custody of me, but Blackwood had intervened. He had connections in the system. He painted Eleanor as an unstable, reclusive old woman, unfit to raise a child. He made sure I was swallowed by the state, lost in the foster care system. He did it to isolate me, to make sure I would never know the truth. He wanted me to grow up feeling abandoned and alone, so that when I turned 18, I would be desperate enough to sell him the one thing he couldn't take by force, my grandmother's land. It was a long, cruel, patient game, and I had been the pawn. I closed the journal, my whole body shaking with a rage so pure and cold it felt like swallowing ice. They hadn't just mocked my inheritance. They had orchestrated my entire life of loneliness and loss just to get their hands on it. My grief for the grandmother I never knew was immense. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been trying to protect me even after her death. This journal, this key, this barn, it wasn't an inheritance, it was an arsenal. And you know, as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It was sharp, focused. It was fuel. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down and you see the world with terrifying clarity. It's a moment that can either break you or forge you into something stronger. If you've ever been through that fire, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, this channel, is built for people who have been through it and come out the other side. So if this is hitting you, take a moment. Hit subscribe. Let us know in the comments that you're here. Because what comes next is the part where we decide not to be pawns in someone else's game anymore. We decide to fight back. The rage kept me warm through the night. I didn't sleep. I sat huddled in the dark of the barn, a wool blanket I'd found in an old trunk wrapped around my shoulders, and read the journal from cover to cover. And then I read it again. I was memorizing my own history, arming myself with the truth. With the first gray light of dawn filtering through the cracks in the barn walls, I found what I was looking for in the final pages. My grandmother was not just a victim, she was a fighter. She knew Blackwood was a criminal, but she couldn't prove it. The local police were in his pocket. So, she started gathering evidence herself. "He thinks I'm just a crazy old woman," she wrote. "He doesn't know that I see everything. I watch his trucks coming and going from the old quarry at night. They aren't hauling stone. I follow them. I take pictures. I write down license plates. I am his shadow. He will not win. This land is not just dirt and wood. It is a promise. It is the last piece of this world that is truly ours, and I will defend it with my last breath. For Sarah, and for Alara. The journal didn't say where she hid the evidence, but it gave me another clue, on the very last page, written in a faltering hand, likely not long before she passed away. The foundation is everything. What is built on stone will stand. What is built on lies will fall. He built his empire on lies. I built my house on stone. The answer is in the foundation. The foundation. I stood up, my joints stiff from the cold. The barn wasn't built on a modern concrete slab. It was built on an old stone foundation, massive blocks of granite pulled from the very quarry Blackwood now used for his shady business. I grabbed a heavy iron pry bar from the workbench and started tapping the stones that made up the floor in the walled-off room at the back of the barn, the one I had noticed earlier. It must have been her workshop, or maybe a place to store preserves. It was small, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet. I tapped each stone, listening to the sound. Thud, thud, thud. They were all solid. I was about to give up when I noticed one stone right in the center of the room. It was no different from the others in size or color, but it had a small, deliberate-looking chip on one edge, a tiny crescent moon carved into its surface. I remembered the note from the tin box, "Trust the grain." This was the same idea, a tiny imperfection that was actually a sign. I wedged the tip of the pry bar into the crack next to the chipped stone. I put all my weight on it. For a moment, nothing happened. The bar groaned in protest. My muscles screamed. Then, with a low, grinding sound of stone against earth, the flagstone began to lift. It was heavy, a thick slab of granite. Underneath was a dark, square hole, a cavity lined with metal. It was a small, fireproof safe, embedded in the earth beneath the floor. And on top of the safe was another letter, this one in a sealed envelope with my name on it. Ilara. I sat back on my heels, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the final piece, the real inheritance. I tore open the envelope. The letter inside was long, several pages filled with that familiar, elegant script. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, then you are smarter and stronger than they ever gave you credit for. I am so sorry. I am sorry for the life you have had. I am sorry I was not there to protect you. Know this, and never doubt it. I have loved you every single day of your life. Every choice I made, especially the hard ones, was to keep you safe." She went on to explain everything. Blackwood's criminal enterprise wasn't just loan sharking. He was using the quarry as a dumping ground for illegal industrial waste, poisoning the water table. Her farm, my farm, had one of the last clean wells in the area. That's what he wanted. Not the land itself, but the water rights. He wanted to acquire her property, poison her well, and then sell the cleanup contract back to the state for millions, all while continuing his dumping operation in secret. It was a diabolical, long-term plan. The safe, she explained, contained everything. Copies of shipping manifests she'd intercepted, photographs of the illegal dumping, water samples she'd had secretly tested, and a detailed ledger of Blackwood's loan sharking victims, including my father. It was enough to ruin him. "This is a heavy burden to place on you," she wrote. "You have two choices. In this safe, along with the evidence, is a box. Inside is every penny I ever saved. Over $50,000 in cash. It is yours. You can take it, walk away from this place, and never look back. Go build a life for yourself, far from here. Be free. You have earned it. No one would blame you." My breath caught. $50,000. It was more money than I could even comprehend. It was safety, security, a new life. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. Or, the letter continued, you can choose the second path. You can take this evidence to the one man in this town I trust, a lawyer named Ben Thompson. His office is on Main Street. He is a good man. His father was my friend. He will know what to do. If you choose this path, you will not be rich. The legal fight will be long and ugly. Blackwood is a powerful man, and he will try to destroy you. But you will be doing the right thing. You will be getting justice for me, for your mother, and for all the people this town has hurt. You will be finishing the work I started. The letter ended with one final, gut-wrenching line. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. You are a Vance. We are not defined by what is taken from us, but by what we choose to protect. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I cried then. I sat on the floor of that cold, dark barn and sobbed. I cried for the mother I barely remembered and the grandmother I never knew. I cried for the lonely, scared little girl I had been. And I cried for the woman I now had to become. The choice was laid out before me, as clear as day. Freedom or justice. Escape or a fight. The easy wrong or the harder right. I looked at the safe, then at the letter in my hand. I thought of Mrs. Gable's tired sympathy, of the kids mocking my inheritance, of Mark Corrigan's predatory smile. They had all underestimated me. They saw a broken girl from the system. They had no idea I was Eleanor Vance's granddaughter. I reached into the hole and put my hand on the cold metal dial of the safe. My grandmother had included the combination in the letter. My decision was already made. The money didn't matter. The barn wasn't a liability, and it wasn't a payday. It was a battlefield. And my grandmother had just handed me the weapons and the map. I was going to finish her war. The safe was heavy, but I managed to wrestle it out of the ground. I carried it to the workbench, my muscles straining. The combination my grandmother had left was a series of numbers that meant nothing to me until I realized it was my mother's birthday. With trembling fingers, I turned the dial. Right, left, right. The final number clicked into place, and with a heavy clunk, the bolts retracted. I pulled the thick metal door open. Inside, it was exactly as she had said. On one side was a metal cash box stuffed to the brim with $100 bills. A quick glance confirmed it, tens of thousands of dollars. A one-way ticket to anywhere. On the other side was a thick, waterproof portfolio. The evidence. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the cash box aside and lifted out the portfolio. It was heavy with the weight of my grandmother's quiet, determined war. I knew I couldn't stay in the barn. Corrigan and his people knew I was here. They had likely been watching the place. Now that I had what they were terrified of, this was the most dangerous place I could be. I packed a small bag with the journal and the portfolio. I left the cash box in the safe. It felt wrong to take it. It was her money, saved for a future I was now choosing to reject. This wasn't about getting rich. It was about getting even. I had to get to Ben Thompson. I slipped out of the barn's back door, using the cover of the thick pine trees to make my way toward the road, avoiding the open path. The snow was still falling, covering my tracks almost as soon as I made them. The 3-mile walk back to town was grueling. The cold was a physical thing, a presence that clawed at my skin and stole my breath. Every snap of a twig in the woods sounded like footsteps behind me. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I was no longer just a lost kid. I was a target. By the time I reached the edge of Northwood, I was exhausted and half frozen, but a cold, hard resolve had settled deep in my gut. I found the office of Thompson Law easily. It was a small, unassuming building tucked between the diner and a hardware store. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The office was warm and quiet, smelling of old books and brewing coffee. A young man with kind eyes and a slightly rumpled suit looked up from his desk. He looked to be in his early 30s. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Are you Ben Thompson?" My voice was hoarse. "I am. My name is Alara Vance. My grandmother was Eleanor Vance. She said I should trust you." I placed the heavy portfolio on his desk. Ben Thompson's expression shifted from polite curiosity to one of intense, sober focus. He stared at the portfolio, then at me, and seemed to understand everything in an instant. "I've been waiting for you," he said softly. He stood up, locked the front door of the office, and flipped the sign to closed. Then he led me to a comfortable chair by a small fireplace, took my frozen coat, and poured me a mug of hot coffee. "Eleanor called me a few months before she passed," he explained, his voice low and serious. "She told me what she was doing. She told me she was leaving everything to you, and that you would one day arrive with this. She made me promise to help you, no matter what." He sat down across from me, his gaze unwavering. "She also told me to warn you. Arthur Blackwood is a dangerous man. Once we open this portfolio, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked at the fire, at the flames dancing and twisting. I thought of my grandmother's elegant, defiant handwriting. "We are not defined by what is taken from us, but by what we choose to protect." "I'm sure," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Let's get to work." We spent the rest of the day in his office. Ben spread the contents of the portfolio across his large mahogany desk. It was even more damning than I had imagined. There were clear, dated photographs of trucks with the Blackwood & Sons logo illegally dumping barrels into the quarry at night. There were shipping manifests for toxic chemicals, cross-referenced with the dates of the dumping. There were the results of water tests showing dangerous levels of contaminants downstream from the quarry, heading directly for the town's water supply. And there was the ledger. Dozens of names of local people trapped in a cycle of debt to Blackwood, my father's name prominent among them. It was a complete, meticulous case file. My grandmother had been a brilliant, patient investigator. This is incredible," Ben murmured, his lawyerly composure cracking with awe. "This is more than enough. This will not just stop him. It will put him away for a very long time." He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." A wave of pride washed over me, so fierce it almost brought me to tears. She wasn't the crazy old hermit the town thought she was. She was a hero. While Ben began making copies and drafting legal notices, he arranged for me to stay in a spare room above his office. It wasn't safe for me to be alone. The next morning, the first shot was fired. Ben filed a massive injunction against Blackwood & Sons, citing environmental contamination, and simultaneously delivered a copy of the evidence to the state's Environmental Protection Agency and the FBI. The reaction was immediate. By noon, state police cars were swarming the quarry. Mark Corrigan showed up at Ben's office, his smooth facade completely gone, replaced by a mask of fury. He tried to threaten me, to intimidate me, telling me I had no idea who I was messing with. I just looked at him, my silence more powerful than any words I could have said. He saw Eleanor in my eyes, and he knew he had lost. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The story broke in the local news, and then the state news. The crazy old woman's granddaughter had come home and exposed the town's biggest secret. People in Northwood started looking at me differently. The whispers weren't of pity anymore. They were of shock, and then of gratitude. People whose wells had gone bad, whose children had unexplained illnesses, started coming forward. My grandmother's ledger gave them the courage to speak up. I wasn't just fighting for my family anymore. I was fighting for the whole town. I spent the next few weeks living in that small room, helping Ben organize the case. I gave my statement to the FBI. I learned the names of the other families Blackwood had ruined, and in the quiet moments, I would walk out to the barn. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. I started cleaning it up, slowly, methodically. I swept the floors, cleaned the tools, and patched the hole in the roof. I found more of her things, books on botany, sketches of birds, a half-finished wood carving. Each discovery was a conversation with the woman who had saved me. I was getting to know her, piece by piece. I was finally home. The legal proceedings dragged on for months, a slow, grinding process of depositions and hearings. Blackwood fought, of course. He hired expensive lawyers from the city who tried to paint me as a delusional, greedy teenager and my grandmother as an unstable eccentric. But the evidence was undeniable. The photographs didn't lie. The water samples didn't lie. The ledger, with its dozens of corroborating witnesses, didn't lie. One by one, his defenses crumbled. Arthur Blackwood was eventually indicted on a host of federal charges, including illegal dumping, racketeering, and fraud. His company collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and fines. The empire he built on lies fell, just as my grandmother had predicted. The day he was sentenced, I sat in the courtroom and watched. He looked old and small, his power stripped away. He never looked at me, but I felt his hatred across the room. It didn't matter. It couldn't touch me anymore. With the legal battle over, a strange quiet settled over my life. The future, which had been a terrifying blank space, was now an open road. The town of Northwood, which had once felt so alien, was starting to feel like home. Bill, the store owner, would save me the paper every morning. The waitress at the diner knew my coffee order. Carl, the plow driver, always made sure Ridge Road was cleared first after a storm. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was Eleanor's girl. I made a final decision. I wasn't going to sell the land. I wasn't going to take the $50,000 from the safe, which was now sitting in a bank vault. I was going to stay. I was going to bring the barn back to life. I used a small portion of the money to hire a local crew to help me. We replaced the sagging roof, fixed the crooked doors, and installed new windows. We ran electricity and plumbing. Slowly, painstakingly, the decaying structure was transformed. It became a beautiful, light-filled space, a workshop and a home. The workbench, my grandmother's workbench, remained the heart of it all. I kept her tools on the pegboard, her jars of hardware on the shelves. Sometimes when I was working there, sanding a piece of wood or fixing a squeaky hinge, I could almost feel her presence beside me, a quiet, approving nod. My inheritance wasn't the acre of land, or the barn, or even the money. It was the choice she gave me. The choice to run or to fight. The choice to be a victim of my story or the author of it. She taught me that the value of a thing isn't what someone is willing to pay for it, but what it's worth protecting. She taught me that home isn't a place you are given, but a place you build, a place you defend. Standing in the doorway of my finished barn, looking out at the snow-covered Vermont hills, I finally understood. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I had roots. They were buried deep in this cold, stubborn soil, intertwined with the memory of a woman I'd never met, but who had given me everything. Her strength was my foundation. Her love was my inheritance. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. And so, my story in Northwood really began. It wasn't an ending, but a beginning. It's a story of rebuilding, not just a barn, but a life. It's a story about how the smallest, most overlooked things can hold the greatest power. It's a lesson that was left for me in a dusty barn. A lesson I carry with me every single day. And it's a lesson I want to share with all of you. Because I think, deep down, we all have our own version of that barn. That thing in our lives that other people dismiss, that looks worthless on the surface, but holds a hidden strength, a secret history, a truth that is waiting to be discovered. What's your barn? What's the thing you've been told is a liability that might actually be your greatest asset? I want you to think about that, and I want you to share it if you feel comfortable. The comments section here isn't just a place for comments, it's a place for stories. It's a community of people who know what it's like to be underestimated. I read every single one. Your stories matter. They are a part of this larger story we are all building together. If my journey means anything to you, if it gives you a little bit of hope or a little bit of strength to face your own battles, then please subscribe to the channel and join our community. Because we all deserve a place where we can trust the grain, find the foundation, and build a home for ourselves, no matter where we start from. Thank you for listening.
Do you want to leave? Okay. Here. There you go. Good morning. What did you want? No? Oh, okay, bye. She's the whole jar of marmalade. She is adorable. Did I hear her meow? Yeah, she did do a little meow, so if you heard that, then you definitely did. Okay. Break that open. Marmalade will always look like a baby cat no matter how old she is, truly. Okay. I saw a guy post today that he was 16 and didn't look a day out of his 20s. Wait, have you guys seen that video of that dude who's like, who says he's like a model and that he like says he looks 22, but in fact he looks every day, he looks like he's lived like for 17,000 years on this planet. You've seen him? Okay. Okay, he looks so creepy and like, I was like, oh my god. Oh yeah, doesn't he say he looks 17 and he looks easily 40? I think 40 is generous, Rosie. Like, it's crazy how old that guy looks.